Feel free to give a quick introduction. I think it would be helpful for
Yeah,
the
so
audience too.
I'll just share my name. My name is Chiranjeev Singh.
Yeah.
I'm a GMAT coach based out of Delhi, India. Um, so today our topic is reading comprehension. So I'll spend the first 30 minutes talking about a few things, a few notes I have on reading comprehension. We'll also take up not a passage, part of the passage, a paragraph of a passage, with which I attempt to explain to you how I read an RC passage, and we'll also do a question based on that one paragraph. So you'll get a sense of. Uh, uh, but before that, I'll be sharing a few thoughts on how to go about reading comprehension. So this all will take about 30 or so minutes, and then we'll take up questions. So whatever questions you have, feel free to share. We'll take them up once I'm done with my part. Okay, so let me share my screen. So my screen is visible. Harsh, can you see that?
Yes. Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So a few notes, starting with a very insightful thing that, yeah, it's a test of reading comprehension section is a test of comprehension. I need to say this. Of course, it's common sense, but as people say, sometimes common sense is not so common. So we have to start with this understanding that eventually what is being tested is your comprehension. So we'll start from this. So now when people read a piece of text, their comprehension lies on a spectrum. So it's not binary, you understand, you don't understand. So it's on a spectrum. Again, we can put some numbers here from 0% to 100%. So complete confusion to complete mastery. So what does your comprehension depend on? It primarily depends on your existing skill level. Okay, so whatever you are bringing with you from your past. Okay, so that's why we have natives perform really well in a short span of time on the verbal section in general. It's not a universal statement, and in general, non-natives struggling because the skill level that they are bringing to the table are different. Okay, so naturally, if we understand that your how much you understand or how much you comprehend a piece of text depends on your existing skill level, the natural next question is how do you build those skills? How do you improve your comprehension? If we understand reading comprehension section is a test of comprehension, how do we build those comprehension skills? The answer is pretty simple, and which a lot of answers are. But and I'll explain it. But the answer is simply that the more you understand, the easier it becomes to understand the next piece of text. Again, it could look like common sense, but as I elaborated, it will sort of begin to make sense, and you'll be able to understand how you can make use of this simple thing to really build your skills. Okay. It's as simple as that. The more you understand, of course, the easier it becomes to understand the next piece of text. Now, wherever you stand, okay, whatever you are understanding, let's say you're understanding 60% of the text, 70%, 80%, whatever that level is, how do you understand more? Right? The more you understand, the better it becomes. But how do you understand more than what you're currently understand? Again, the answer is simple that you need to break down the text. And I'll explain in detail what breaking down a piece of text means. But for now, I'll say that let's take an example to understand this. Let's say you're trying to lift 50 kgs at once. This is the task given to you. You need to lift 50 kgs and take it somewhere else. But this is beyond your skill level. You don't have the ability to lift 50 kgs all at once. So now you strain, struggle, you keep failing, and then you're like, "Oh, I'm stuck." And you remain stuck for a long period of time. And then somebody you meet, he says, "Well, why don't you do one thing? Why don't you break this 50 kgs into two parts, 25 kgs each, and then you can take it one at a time?" It may look like such a simple thing. Of course, yeah, I can do that. Why didn't anybody tell me earlier? But once you do that, your problem is solved. It's a simple thing, but it can make a great difference to a person who is stuck. This is the this is the kind of impact it can have. It can sort of make you unstuck. Now, let me start with a very familiar breaking down strategy that a lot of people are familiar with. So one thing that a lot of people are familiar with in the context of reading comprehension is that you should not read the entire passage in one go. You should take pauses or break down the passage into paragraphs and essentially take a pause after each paragraph, assimilate it, and then move on. Right? So in this case, eventually your goal is to read the entire passage, but you're breaking down the problem and you're saying, well, okay, I need to understand the entire passage, but I'll not read the entire passage and then try to understand all at once. What I'll do is I'll read one paragraph at a time and understand it and then move on. Then I understand the next paragraph connected with the first paragraph. So I've now assimilated both and now I move on. This is a strategy which I think a lot of people are familiar with, that you read one paragraph at a time. Right? It's one application of breaking down. But you don't need to stop at that level. You can take the strategy of breaking down further. What I mean by that is, if a paragraph feels challenging, so right now what people are faced with is that, okay, I need to read the entire paragraph in one go and understand it and then move on. But the entire paragraph may also be too much for you to understand in one go. So you read the paragraph in one go, so you understand only 20, 30, 40, 50% of it. And you're like, well, I understand only this much. And then you move on. You don't know any way out of it. What do? I can only understand this much. This is my level. This is my capability. But now we can use the same strategy of breaking down at a more granular level. And this strategy is, again, very simple, but at the same time, it can bring about a significant change. And I have seen it make a significant difference to a lot of people's preparation. This thing is simple, that you don't need to read the entire paragraph in one go. You can read one sentence, understand it completely, connect it back to the previous context, and then move on. So instead of reading a paragraph, connecting it back, so instead of moving at the level of paragraphs, you're now moving at the level of sentences. So at any given point of time, your job is just to fit this sentence, to understand this sentence and to fit it back into the context. So your job is far simpler, far smaller than trying to understand a full paragraph and then connecting it back. And I have the audacity to say that it's a game-changing approach, because I've seen the effects of this. Once people start following it, they immediately see a significant difference in their ability to understand any piece of text. And you will see this in action once I take up that paragraph that I've chosen for this session. Now, the thing is, you need not even stop. This mindset that you can break down the problem into smaller components. This is the mindset that we are talking about. First, we move from passage to a paragraph, which a lot of people are familiar with. Then now we move from a paragraph to a sentence, which again, as I said, could be game-changing for a lot of people. Now I can take it even further to within a sentence. So let me explain that. Now, not all sentences are of equal difficulty levels. There are 4 factors that I can identify that impacts the difficulty level of a sentence. Vocabulary, naturally, the more difficult the vocabulary is, the more difficult the sentence. The length of the sentence, the longer the sentence, more difficult it is to understand. the structure, so not just the length, but if it has a lot of modifiers, then also the structure of the sentence may make it difficult to understand. And lastly, whether you're familiar with the context. So if you're familiar with the context, so let's say if you're from a business background, you're reading a business passage and a sentence from that, it's going to be easier for you to understand that compared to, let's say, if you're reading a geology sentence and you have no familiarity with that, right? So all of these four factors contribute to the difficulty level of a sentence. So sentence could be very easy, medium, hard. So right, depending upon how I play on these four factors, the sentence could be excruciatingly hard if I make it extremely long, structure also a lot of modifiers, vocabulary tough, and you don't have any idea of the context of which this sentence is about, then it could be extremely hard. But what I see very consistently people do is they have the same way of reading every sentence, which is that they read the sentence in one go. They take a pause only when they reach a full stop, when they have read the entire sentence. Now, depending upon your skill level, this may work for easy sentences, medium sentences also, or for people who are highly skilled, this may work for hard sentences also. But depending upon your skill level, things may become hard. Okay, the strategy. So you are trying to understand the whole sentence in one go. But if the sentence is beyond your skill level, you're asking your mind to do too much at once. So at that time, the mind starts taking calls. So instead of having a very concrete idea of what the sentence is saying, you're like, well, I think the sentence is saying this. So this is now coming in the realm of that, well, your mind cannot process all of this at once. So now it's taking calls. Well, I think this is what it is saying. So then now, of course, your guesses could be right at times or your guesses could be wrong. So now it's a game of luck. So what I'm going to share with you, and at least the idea I'm sharing with you right now, and you'll see that in action once we get to the passage, is that you need not read the entire sentence also in one go. Okay, I'm not saying that you start reading easy sentences also part by part, but I'm saying you have the option to read a sentence part by part. Okay, and once you start doing that, you'll be feeding your mind only that much data that it can handle sensibly at a time. So you will not be taking calls as to what the sentence is saying. You'll have a very clear idea that this is what this sentence means and there is nothing else that it can mean. Okay, so when I read a sentence, or when you see any top scorer or any expert reading a sentence, they have a very clear idea that this is what it means and it cannot mean anything else. Okay, they are not taking guesses. Well, I think this could be the meaning of. No, that's not the case. Okay, so we can talk about all these, that you take pauses at the end of every sentence, you connect every sentence back, or you can read even a sentence part by part. But then the natural question people have is, well, I can do all of this if I had a lot of time, but the test is timed. Right? I have just 2 minutes per question. If I start applying all this, taking pause at the end of every sentence or taking pause in the middle of a sentence, then definitely my timing is never going to be in place. I'll never be able to complete the test. I understand that concern, so let me address that directly. So one thing that people don't understand, at least in the realm of the GMAT, probably in their own domains, they completely get it, is that speed is not a skill in itself. It's a consequence of the skills. Basically, in other words, speed is a reflection of the skills. If you want to change the reflection, you don't work on the reflection, you work on the original thing. right? So that is what I'm essentially going to ask you. Speed is a result of skills which can be further broken down into two components. One is clarity aspect of skills, the second is the comfort aspect. And again, these words are non-technical, very simple things. Clarity is that when you read a piece of text, you know exactly what it means. You're just so clear. You're not going back and forth. And you can understand if you're rereading, going back and forth, getting stuck in the last two options, it's a problem of clarity. And that wastes your time. Okay, in terms of, let's say if I take analogy of dance, then it's like getting every step right. So if you're a dancer, you have clarity if you're getting every step right. If you're getting 80% of the steps right, then 80% is your clarity. Okay, so clarity is about getting the dance steps right. What is comfort? Comfort is that you're not comfortable also with the steps. Now, this is where fluency comes in. In the initial thing, what I'm just talking about is you're getting the dance steps right. But you may need to be very slow to get the dance steps right. As soon as you try to pick up speed, you start faltering. Okay. So you have clarity, but you have not built fluency or comfort with the steps. How does comfort set in? First thing to understand it's a sequence. You cannot have comfort without clarity. The first thing that comes is clarity, that you are now very clear. It takes time, but now you're clear. And again, here also a lot of people have misconception. Students come to me saying, well, if I have a lot of time, then I can get every question right. The problem is only timing. And then then give them a passage of medium to hard level and ask them to solve them, taking whatever time they need. They take whatever time they need, and they still get only 70% right. And then they're like, oh, okay. Okay, so there is a clarity level problem also people may not be aware of. But once you have clarity, once you can consistently hit 90-95% accuracy, then it's about comfort. Comfort is just repetition of clarity. Once you have clarity, the more you repeat, the more comfortable you become. But without clarity, if you just start repeating, you'll end up building a lot of habits that you'll eventually have to undo later. Right? It's like becoming comfortable with the wrong dance steps. Okay, so speed is not something that you chase. Right? As I said, it's a reflection in the mirror. You don't chase that. You fix the person whose reflection is that. Okay, so speed is something that naturally emerges as your skills improve. So the sequence is, as I said, the more you understand, the easier it becomes. And the easier it becomes, the faster you can do the job. So the sequence is, right now you strive for greater understanding. And as you keep striving for greater understanding, ease comes in. Then whatever is easy doesn't take much time. Okay, so that's when the speed happens. So we can take the example of a piano player. So what is the difference between a beginner and an expert or a master there? A beginner can say, well, I can play all the notes. That's not an issue with me. But all the notes you may take, right? An hour to play all the notes, which needs to be played in 5 minutes for it to really produce any sense of music, right? So speed is a reflection of the skills. Again, I'm just trying to give an example of that. And you don't achieve speed by just trying to play fast. The beginner can't say, well, I'll try to play fast and then I'll just get there. No, it's a gradual building of skills that happen over time. As you keep working on 1 or 2 notes, 2 and 3 notes, 4 notes, 5 notes, 10 notes at a time, then gradually you build the skills, and then there comes a time when you're able to play the entire sort of set of notes in one go at the pace that is required to make sense. Okay, so again, speed is a result of skills, And this applies to all domains of life, and of course, it also applies to reading comprehension. With that, okay, so this is a little distorted. Uh, so this is the paragraph that we'll be attempting. Okay, but I first want you to attempt it on your own. So just take, I'll give you, Harsh, can we give them 5 minutes to do this?
Yes, we can. We have time.
So you have 5 minutes to attempt this. So you can share your answer in the chat with us. Then I'll sort of share with you how I read a passage, and then we'll solve this question also. So just take 5 minutes. In the meanwhile, I'll arrange these options. Okay, I think 5 minutes are up. I don't see any answers. People need more time or what? Not interested in answering.
I think you just came up with the most difficult dense message.
Okay, so we have some answers. So let's wait for 30 more seconds and then I'll start. Okay, so let me start. And of course, on the screen, you can see the sentences of the passage and my understanding. But I want you to focus more on what I'm speaking because I'll be sharing you how I read a sentence as I'm reading it, not once I've read it. So what you see on the screen is my final analysis of the sentence. So for example, I'll start. So when I read microwave patterns found on teeth, now this is not a familiar context for me. I'm a MBA student, so I've done my MBA. Before that, I was at a BSc, so I have science background, but I don't have archaeology or this kind of background. So when I read microwave patterns, I have no idea microwave patterns is what. And what I'm going to share with you is the typical way I go about understanding anything that I'm not familiar with. I try to recognize what I'm familiar with. I'm familiar with micro, of course. Micro means something extremely small. Wear patterns, so found on teeth. So it seems like wear and tear. I can relate with that. So micro wear patterns. So wear and tear patterns on the teeth. So of course, it's talking about teeth, which are typically small. So it makes sense to talk about micro wear patterns found on teeth. So that's how I try to decode the meaning of something by sort of trying to see what I can make sense of it, what I know, and then try to put it together to see what it could mean in a sensible way. So, microwave patterns found on the teeth of long extant specimens. Okay, so these patterns are found on teeth of long extent. So long ago, they went extinct. Specimens of the primate species A. I don't know how to pronounce it. Okay, so we are talking about patterns, wear patterns on the teeth of long extent specimens of some species A. Okay, so now let's take a pause here and let me explain what's going on. First of all, I came across something that I didn't understand, and as I said, I sort of paid attention to what I could make sense of it, put it together, and made sense of it. Secondly, I'm trying to understand the sentence as I'm reading, right? So I've not read the entire sentence till now. I've just read till primate species A. But I have assimilated till that point that, okay, we are talking about patterns on teeth. So in my mind, there is, right, I'm constantly, you can see my gestures constantly going to my teeth because in my mind, I can visualize somebody's teeth. And these are long extinct species, specimens of some species. So I'm assimilating the sentence as I read. This is not anything exotic. This is something that happens automatically in the minds of people with high skill level. For example, Harsh, it would be happening as he's reading, his mind is processing. But if you don't have that skill and you don't even know this is what you're supposed to do, then what you're going to do is you'll read the entire sentence and at the end you will ask what went on? What is it talking about? But a lot has gone on. Okay. So of course, if you have very high skills, then you can handle very complex sentences, unfamiliar sentences also in one go, and your mind will be able to make sense, or rather it will be making sense as it is reading, because the processing can happen at the speed of reading. But if you are not at that skill level, your processing needs much more time. In that case, you need to be aware that I'm supposed to make sense of this as I read, or I have at least I have the option to make sense as I read. I don't need to take a pause only at the end of the sentence. Okay, this is something as I which I talked about earlier, that you need not read even the entire sentence in one go. And this is what even I do. I also have a great score, but naturally it is, I may have a high skill level, but it is not that I don't come across sentences which are not even difficult for me. I keep coming across sentences which are difficult even for me. So there the process comes in hand. Otherwise, you may have the skills, but you don't have the process, then you're completely reliant on the skill to make sense of whatever you're reading for you. And if your skills fail, you're gone. But I can also have the process in place where I can handle one thing at a time. I can break down, make sense of it part by part. That's what I'm doing here. And that's what I do. Okay, this is not something that I'm just teaching. Rather, what I'm teaching is what I've come to understand by observing my own self, how I read, how I process. And that's how I've been teaching. And of course, I see it is helping others. So microwave patterns found in the teeth of this long extinct specimen of this A may provide evidence of their diets. Oh, okay. So by looking at these patterns, we can have some idea about what they ate. Okay, that's what the eventual thing is. Let me also talk a little about a common concern people have: how much should I pay attention to the details, and how much should I really get an overall idea. My point is simply that you get an overall idea by paying attention to the details. If you're really, for example, when I'm trying to understand this, I'm really processing each and everything that's coming along. And then at the end of the sentence, I realize, okay, overall it is saying this, right? In my final gist of this sentence, I've not captured all the details, but I've been able to really understand all of this because I've really tried to pay attention to everything that is there. Okay, of course, if there are examples and there are lists of things, then I might not read everything with the same level of attention, but that is a very unique case. Typically, it's not about paying attention to details versus getting an overall idea. You get the overall idea by really understanding each and everything that is there. Okay, so for example, okay, so now we move on to the second sentence. It says, for example, so it's an example of something the first sentence has talked about. I get that. On the basis of tooth microwave patterns we have talked about, Walker, some guy, dismisses Jolly's hypothesis. Okay, this guy is dismissing somebody else's hypothesis. Both are new for me. That A ate heart seeds. Oh, so Walker is looking at MWP of A, and he's dismissing, or he or she, whatever that is, I'll just use he. He's dismissing Jolly's hypothesis. Jolly was saying that A ate heart seeds. Okay. So by looking at MWP, he's dismissing that no, they didn't eat heart seeds. How could he have said that? Possibly the MWP did not contain the patterns that could indicate that they were eating heart seeds, right? So this is the link that I try to understand it. Okay, by looking at this pattern, Walker is saying, no, they didn't eat heart seeds. Okay, so perhaps there was no pattern corresponding to what you would typically expect when somebody is eating heart seeds. Now, this kind of connection would happen automatically, subconsciously, in the minds of people who are highly skilled, or for whom this context is familiar, or who are in generally very highly skilled. But if we are not that skilled, we need to take pause and consciously make the connection. Okay? And this is the disparity that happens. That people who have the skills, they make connections, so they wouldn't tell anybody else to make the connection because the connections are happening automatically. So even if somebody asks them, okay, how did you really make sense of it? They will say, I just read it. And of course, this is what they did. But the mind is making these connections automatically. And if I ask a high scorer, then he might have a hard time communicating it, but given just by the words that person is using, I will just get it. The person has understood the connection. Whereas if you're not that highly skilled, your mind will not form the connection. And if you don't know that you're supposed to make the connection, you will not make the connection and move on. And your comprehension is now beginning to falter. You're not understanding how things are happening. Okay, you're not understanding the connections between sentences. You may be understanding individual sentences, but any paragraph or a passage is not a collection of randomly put together statements, right? There are connections there, and understanding those connections is very much a part of comprehension. Okay, so let me go on. So he also disputes. By the way, Walker is he. So he also disputes Zale's suggestion. Okay, so Walker is also disputing or cancelling or saying this is not correct, that the heavy enamel of A's teeth is an adaptation to bone crunching. Okay, so again, I'll take a pause here to really make sense of it. So he's saying, well, heavy enamel, whatever you found on the teeth of A, is not an adaptation to bone crunching. Okay, it's not an adaptation. But he's not saying that there is no heavy enamel. He's just saying it's not an adaptation to bone crunching. Okay, I see. Since both seed cracking and bone crunching produce distinctive microwear characteristics or patterns on teeth. Oh, I see. Now it really makes sense. So he's looking at NWP of A and seed cracking and bone crunching, both of them produce a very specific kind of microwear patterns on teeth, right? And they must be absent. This is not given that they are absent, right? But they must be absent, given that only then can this whole thing make sense. So they must be absent on A's teeth. So by looking at their absence, Walker is saying, well, they didn't eat hard seeds. They were not bone crunching. Okay, so if they were not bone crunching, if they were not even bone crunching, the enamel cannot be an adaptation to bone crunching. So this is the chain of thought. He's looking at MWP of A, and he's saying there is no such microwear patterns corresponding to seed cracking and bone crunching. So they were not doing these things. So how can enamel be a adaptation to bone crunching if they were not even doing bone crunching? Okay, so I understand this. So in my mind, as I'm not sure, I think you can perhaps notice, I'm really paying attention to everything, but now I understand. But when I move on, I keep the story in mind that, okay, eventually he was saying that they were not eating hard seeds based on MWP. Now he's saying they were not even bone crunching. So enamel cannot be an adaptation. Makes sense. Okay. And then I go to the last sentence of this paragraph, because we're just looking at this paragraph. His conclusion. So we are talking about Walker's conclusion that A were frugivores, fruit eaters. So thank God they have told us what frugivores mean. So Walker is actually concluding that they were frugivores. He ruled out they were not eating seeds, they were not bone crunching, they were not really crunching bones. He's saying actually they were just fruit eaters. And how he's saying is based on his observation that tooth MWP of East African. So when I read this, I see, oh, he's talking about specific East African specimens. not in general, all of them. Okay, I see. Then of course my mind is also thinking, well, but what about West African? They could be doing something else and all that. But I'll not get there because my job is to comprehend here. So the tooth MWP of these specimens are indistinguishable, same as those of chimpanzees and orangutans, which are commonly assumed to be frugivorous primates. Oh, okay. So he's looking at the MWP of A, and he's saying, well, the MWP is the same as MWP of orangutans and chimpanzees, who are assumed to be frugivorous, so they must also be frugivorous. Right? So based on similarity of MWP, Walker is concluding they were fruit eaters. Right? So this is what the paragraph was about. It started by saying that MWP may provide evidence about what people ate or about their diets. And then Walker is saying, well, they didn't eat hard seeds. Then Walker is saying, well, they were not into crunching bones. So heavy enamel cannot be an adaptation to bone crunching. Then lastly, Walker is concluding, well, they were frugivores because MWP of A is the same as MWP of chimpanzees and orangutans. This is what the paragraph is about. So let's now talk about the question. So here are the options and here is my analysis. But let's just follow my audio here. So I have highlighted this part because this is the part that the question is about. Walker and Zale disagree on which of the following points? So we have to find a point on which Walker and Zale disagree on. Okay. The first option is structure and composition of A's teeth. Nobody is talking about structure and composition of A's teeth here, neither Zale nor Walker. Right? We are talking about just patterns on the teeth, not the structure and composition. Second, which is option B, which is a popular option on GMAT Club statistics also, and here also, the kind of conclusions that can be drawn from MWP on A's teeth. Okay, again, you need to very clearly follow the question. Walker and Zale disagree on the kinds of conclusion. This is the meaning if you select B. Walker and Zale disagree on the kinds of conclusion that can be drawn from these patterns. But is Zale making any comment on what can or cannot be drawn from microwear patterns? No, we are not told anywhere that Zale is making any comment on what conclusion can be drawn from microwear patterns. Zale has made a suggestion that heavy enamel is an adaptation to bone crunching. On what basis did he make this suggestion? We are not given. Now, Walker is using MWP to dispute Zale. But what does Zale think about MWP? We are not given. So option B is wrong. And by studying MWP, Walker is disputing Zale. But what can or cannot be drawn from MW is not the point of disagreement between Zale and Walker, because we are not told anything about what Zale thinks about what can be drawn from microwear patterns. Option C, the idea that fruit was a part of A's diet. So Zale is saying that it's an adaptation to bone crunching. So definitely Zale thinks that crunching bones must be a part of their diet. But whether fruit is a part of their diet, we are not told. Right? Whether Zale thinks that no, they are just into bone crunching, they are not eating fruits. No, we are not told that. Okay, so we can't say this is the point of disagreement. If the option C were the idea that fruit was the only part of diet, then this would be something they disagree on, because according to Walker, yes, Walker is saying they were fruit eaters, so fruit was the only part, and Zale would disagree. No, they were definitely into bone crunching, so fruit cannot be the only part. Okay, but that is not the option A, and You cannot have two correct options. So given option E, that will not appear. Option D, the extent to which seed cracking and bone crunching produce similar patterns. So the extent to which they produce similar patterns, whether they are exactly same or they are 90% same, nobody is talking about how similar these patterns corresponding to seed cracking and bone crunching are. So nobody is talking about this. Last, which is the correct option, the function of the heavy enamel on A's teeth. So Zale thinks that heavy enamel is an adaptation to bone crunching. Adaptation to bone crunching means this is something that that happens. The body adapted to bone crunching, so the body needed this in a way to do the job of bone crunching. So definitely, in Zale's opinion, the function of enamel was to assist the body in bone crunching. But right, Walker thinks no, this cannot be the case because A was not even bone crunching. So the heavy enamel cannot be performing that function. So this is the point of dispute between Walker and Zale, that the function of heavy enamel. That's all from my side. If you have any questions from anything I've covered or any questions on RC in general, please feel free to ask.
Yes, I will bring few questions on the screen. We have the first question. So yeah, feel free to pick those up.
Is it so there's Soumya's one?
Yep.
Okay, good. Is it a good idea to skip difficult names or terms? Yes, of course. It is definitely useful, as I was also doing. Instead of reading that whatever A term was, I would just see A, right? Because if you start pronouncing it every time, that takes effort, and you don't want to waste your time and effort there. It makes sense to just abbreviate them or just use the first letters and all that.
So seems like there's a follow-up when we have same initials for multiple names. What do we
yeah, Jane, Julia, Jolly. So I wouldn't use any abbreviations for these people. But yeah, of course, if there were two species with the same starting letter A, then I would use AT, AB, and all that. And if there are a lot of them, generally that is not the case. That there are a lot of such technical terms with the same initials and almost the same terms. Typically, abbreviation helps and works. So this is a behavior that we engage in, that we think that we don't have time, so we rush, we don't comprehend, then we have to reread, we take more time, we feel more rushed, so it's a vicious cycle. Okay, so the way out is to understand this is the behavior that you are engaging in, which is not helpful. What's going to help is that you comprehend, right? Comprehend in one go, so that you don't have to read it again or go back and forth between the options. So slow is the way to become fast eventually. So slow doesn't mean that you unnecessarily slow down. Slow just means that you give the text the required amount of time, whatever time it requires for you to comprehend it. If you comprehend it, you move on, then you are not rereading, you're not getting stuck in the options. But if you rush, then essentially it's a loop that you're getting into.
So I have a follow-up on this question. Like lot many times when we are sitting in the middle of the test and time is running against us, and then we see a dense passage where we try to implement whatever we discussed today, trying to break the statement, trying to understand it, but nothing seems to be working. So what would be your advice? Like, should we go through the rest of the paragraphs, or should we skip and maybe try to utilize the review feature in those scenarios?
It's a psychological issue that your brain is now hijacked by severity of the emotions. So it's not able to really do the sensible thing, right? It's really trying to, some people, right, panic out, some people go blank, depending upon how severe those things are. So naturally, so there are a couple of things that you can do. One is that something that you can do is, if you know that this is happening consistently in your mocks and it's playing a significant role, then deal with it in a way that you can take a professional help also if needed. Okay, this is a psychological issue, but it has an impact eventually on your preparation and the exam. Okay, so take help if needed. Now, within the exam, if you're sitting so that is something that you do before the exam. But if you're sitting the exam and you're trying to make sense of it and it's not happening, better you take calls and move on instead of spending a lot of time and making a compromise on the entire section. How do we know which sentence we should focus more time on and which we can skim through? Because sometimes some sentences hold more important info than others. So I don't agree with the idea of skimming through. Uh, I understand everything. Then I realize that, okay, this is just an explanation of the previous thing. Then actually understanding it becomes pretty fast for me. Okay, for example, when I was reading that microwave patterns once, it talked about bone crunching and seed cracking produce distinctive pattern. That was just, oh, I had already figured it out in the earlier sentence while I was trying to understand the earlier sentence. So I would go through it pretty fast. But does it mean that I've skimmed through it? Not necessarily. I've just understood it very clearly because I'd understood the previous parts. So now, which sentence should we focus more time on, or let's say spend more time on, depends on which sentence is more difficult for you to make sense of. As I said, so one thing is that people read one sentence in one go, regardless of the complexity of the sentence. That is one way of looking at the problem. Another way is people spend the same amount of time on every sentence, whereas different sentences are of different difficulty levels. There is a passage that I usually do in my private tutoring sessions. So it consists of two paragraphs, and typically the first paragraph, if I'm discussing it with a student, the first paragraph takes about 20-30 minutes. The first sentence of the second paragraph itself takes 30 minutes because the variety of mistakes people make in comprehending that, because the sentence is pretty nuanced. Even I have to slow down. I would end up spending 2 to 3 to 4 times as much time as I'm spending on per sentence on the earlier sentences. So sentences are of very different difficulty levels. So now you need to have that awareness, whether am I making sense of this as I'm reading? If not, slow down. Right? That's a way to measure whether you need to slow down or you can read faster, whether you're assimilating it. We shouldn't skim the passage before reading the question. So I can understand the source perhaps of this question is that, I'm not sure whether you've thought about the source, but I wonder about the source of this question, and because this question has been asked earlier also from me. Because eventually we are not getting any points for understanding the passage, right? We're getting points for getting the question right. So why really spend a lot of time on the passage when it doesn't even count? What matters is we're getting the question right. So whatever is asked in the question, then we can go back to the specific part of the passage to really understand it, right? Because that's eventually the objective. But that doesn't work, and you can try it as long as you want. But in my experience, that doesn't work. It's a test of comprehension. Okay. The more you comprehend whatever is given, there are a variety of connections between sentences, between paragraphs. If you're trying to go back to the specific part and you're just trying to read it, oh, well, this is connected, this question is just specific for this, you may miss it. Because the second paragraph is connected to the first, it's also connected to the third, and all that. Point is simply, understand the passage first. The better your comprehension is, the better your score will be. How to practice linking sentences the right way? Think of a following sentence as a result, but it is in fact reflection and both ways fit. I'm not sure whether I really get the second part of it. How to practice linking sentences? One thing is simply that uh, at the end of every sentence, you try to connect it. That how this sentence connects with the context and this sentence. That's also in your mind. You try to understand how it is building up. Now here comes the interesting part, that now we have a technology that can assist us tremendously in this job, which is AI. So within AI, the model that I specifically recommend for logical critical thinking purposes is Gemini 2.5 Pro. So you can share with it the sentence that whatever you are trying to understand, you can share your understanding with it, then try to ask it whether it agrees, it doesn't agree, and then you can have a conversation there. A lot of times you'll find that it will help you really make sense of the text.
And my follow-up question on building stamina is like how to solve back-to-back 4 hours is like we have seen lot many instances in the past. When we prepare our best, we are totally in our mind trying to solve everything, and then we just get back-to-back 4 reading comprehensions, and by the time we end up on fourth, we don't even know what we are reading. And it's not just the skill; it's just like how the test throws different questions at us. So, any ideas, suggestions around those things?
There are two aspects to this. One is the difficulty, how difficult it is for you. Okay, naturally, if something is very difficult and you're doing it back to back, back to back, back to back, naturally it's going to drain you, quite natural, if you're doing a difficult task. But that is one of the objectives of the preparation, that things should start becoming easier for you. And that would happen if you're doing your preparation the right way. Things will become easier over time. So that is the one. It's a relationship between your skill and the difficulty level. So if your skill matches, then it will not really remain as difficult. So you'll not get so drained out. That is one aspect of this. The second aspect, which plays a very significant role, especially nowadays, is the psychological aspect of it. That you could be drained out not by the cognitive effort, but all the variety of thoughts that you're having at the back of your mind, thinking, kya score aayega, what kind of score, when what will happen, no, I'm not understanding, I'm getting confused. This is not really cognitive effort. This is a psychological effort that you're spending unnecessarily there. Okay, for example, when I take the GMAT, uh, sort of I had to come to a stage where I made peace with scoring much lower than my ability level. So when I take the GMAT, I'm generally extremely relaxed because I made peace. Of course, you can say I can make peace because it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to do an MBA. That's fine, but but I made peace. So if once I come out of the test center, if you say okay, take an hour break and go back, take another attempt, I can do that. Of course, both the aspects are there. Again, the cognitive effort is not much for me, but more importantly, I'm not anxious, stressed out because of psychological reasons, and that could be a significant factor for somebody and for a lot of people actually. If that is so, and again, you need to do something about it before you enter the test room.
Cool. I think one last question from my end. We have seen multiple candidates struggle with the inference questions, especially when we deal with dense passages, when we are not able to understand each and every sentence, word. So, what would be your advice? Are there any specific traps which we should look for, or how should we generally approach those kind of questions?
So I'll not say in terms of specific traps that are there. Of course, there are variety of shortcuts which there are traps, but eventually people, they become tricks. That extreme words are, of course, a lot of time if you use an extreme word in any sentence, it becomes less likely to be true in general in life also, right?
Yep.
Saying that Harsh is uh, likely saying the right thing is different from saying Harsh always says the right thing. These are two different things. The second statement is much less likely to be true,
Yep.
right? So there are those kinds of things, but typically people become so fixated on these that they end up rejecting every option with the extreme option, with the extreme word there, and get it wrong many times. The thing is, so one is comprehension. For example, the question that we did also, people may not have really understood that, oh, Zale also needs to have an opinion on what can be drawn from the microwave patterns. So it's a problem of comprehension. When you read the question that they disagree on what, and then you read the option, you know that they disagree, and yeah, Walker is using MWP to disagree with him. But you need to understand the option within the context of the question, that they both disagree on what can be drawn from MWP. So now these are the variety of comprehension mistakes you could be making, not just at the level of the passage, at the level of the question, at the level of the options also. So analyze whatever mistakes you're making in detail, and you will see what kind of patterns emerge from them.
Got it. And last one, there are n number of questions available to practice currently, correct, across the internet. So what would be your suggestion around getting a particular accuracy across a difficulty level, which would make you a good candidate to kind of book your test and kind of get a decent target score which you are aiming for?
So yeah, so but decent what is a decent target score is a very subjective thing, right? So people,
Correct.
when people approach me, they say they have not gotten a good score. I have no idea what the score is. Some people say I've just gotten 655. That's not a good score. Some people say 455. So I don't know what a good score, not a good score means. Similarly, again, so your target accuracy essentially depends on the score that you're targeting. If you're targeting a very high score, then your target accuracy will also be much higher, right? But there are stages of preparation, and there are stages of assessment or measurement. So for example, the first stage is, as I say, it's a first thing is that you become familiar with the concepts, going through a course or whatever, the concepts that are tested. Then in terms of practice, the first is untimed. What is your accuracy? Okay, whatever time you are taking, how much accuracy you are able to hit. Now that also again may depend on, if you're targeting 100th percentile, then naturally you'll be aiming for almost 100% accuracy in medium questions, and 80% accuracy on hard questions, and very hard question 70% or whatever accuracy. But for a person who's let's say targeting a 655, he may not even be concerned about very hard questions. Okay, he may just focus on medium and at the most hard questions, right? So then again, it starts from untimed accuracy, and then as you keep practicing, as your skills improve, what happens is your speed improves. So you need less and less time to maintain the same level of accuracy. What people do is they're getting a lot of accuracy in untimed, but yet they need to take 7 minutes or 8 minutes or 10 minutes per question, whatever time they are taking per question, or 5 minutes per question. And this would start immediately taking 2 minutes per question. Naturally, the accuracy plummets, goes down drastically, because you need 5 minutes right now to do a good job on the questions, and you're suddenly taking 2 minutes. So it is always, they are always stuck between this. If I try to maintain accuracy, then timing goes off. If I try to get the timing right, the solution lies in the source of speed, which is skills. If your skills improve, you can get the same accuracy in 2 minutes that you're right now getting in 5 minutes.
Yep. Cool. I think that's pretty much it from our end. Thank you everyone for joining. Thanks Chiranjeev for this wonderful session. I think it was
Thank you,
super
Harsh.
helpful, super detailed, and we got to know a lot from this.
Thank you, Harsh. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone, for
everyone.
joining.
Have
Thank
a
you.
nice day.
Bye.